Hello, I'm Nick Hobden, partner and head of the employment department at Thompson Son and Passmore, and welcome to this video, another in our series. And I'm joined by Ben Stepney, partner in my team. We're here to talk about the right to disconnect or the right to switch off. Ben, can I firstly start by asking you whose idea it is and what's it about?
Well, the Labour Party proposed to introduce a right to disconnect in their Make Work Pay plan, and which was also referred to in their manifesto. The right to disconnect is about entitling workers to disconnect or switch off from the workplace out of hours. Modern technology makes it easy for workers to log in remotely, check emails, check calls and respond accordingly. But what this does, this leads to a increase in so-called hidden overtime, where incrementally workers are checking emails, taking calls out of hours, and that eats into evenings and weekends, meaning that the workers never truly switched off from the workplace.
Okay. So Ben, now that we have a Labour government, Labour got into government on Friday the 5th of July. What does this new right to disconnect look like from their legislative or policy making perspective?
Well, it has been diluted slightly from a right for a worker to disconnect to setting up mechanisms for employers and workers to have constructive conversations about coming up with policies or contractual terms that suit both parties, that address this issue of hidden overtime and being able to disconnect from the workplace.
Ben, just a word on what other countries are doing. I mean, obviously we're out of Europe, but this sort of feels like a European initiative. Can you sort of just briefly explain what other countries that are in the sort of Eurozone are doing about this right to disconnect?
So in Labour's Make Work Pay plan, which was pre-election, they specifically referred to modelling the right to disconnect on what was in place in Ireland and Belgium. So in Ireland, they've already introduced a right to disconnect, which allows employees to insist on not routinely working outside of normal working hours, to have that right respected, as in not be contacted by their employer during that time, and not be subject to a detriment for exercising that right. However, it's not easy to enforce legally. It's in a code of practice, which is essentially voluntary on employers. In Belgium, private sector employers have to have a policy on this, on the right to disconnect, in place. But it's very difficult for employees to enforce it. There's no freestanding claim to say my employer's breach this policy, but it can be taken into account in any related claims by employees about working conditions, health and safety, or working time issues.
So it could, in a sense, I suppose, be come up in connection with a performance improvement plan or a capability issue about how someone is performing in the role that they haven't necessarily answered the mobile phone out of hours or responded to an email. Is that right?
It can certainly come up in that context, and I think that's part of the concern on employers and legislators, is about how to accommodate that. Naturally, some jobs require out of hours working. There might be customers in different time zones, and some jobs specifically require being on call out of normal working hours. So this needs to be taken into account if there is going to be legislation in the UK on this issue. In the meantime, for UK employers, before they may be forced to have a policy in place, it could be a good idea to think now about what that policy might look like, so you can refer to that policy if issues come up about in-performance reviews about somebody's application to their job.
So, Ben, ahead of whatever the Labour government decide to do next, and there are a whole range of areas where they've promised legislation, whether it's in the first 100 days of taking office or what's going to come up in the autumn statement. What would you advise employers to do now around the right to disconnect?
Well, the devil will be in the detail of any legislation that comes forwards, and you can imagine a number of ways it could be presented. It could be a voluntary code of practice, it could be an enforceable legal right in an employment tribunal, it could apply to large employers, and we need to know what the exceptions would be for jobs that require out-of-hours working. I would say to employers in the meantime, it's worth thinking about the hours your employees are working, how you can record that, how are you going to show that somebody is or isn't managing to disconnect from work and the hours they're putting in, and then to think about almost per job, per department, per role, which ones require this flexibility with hours and which ones don't, and which ones should we be saying to people, once you leave or log off at 5:30, then that should be, you should not expect to hear from us until the next morning. So I think there's plenty to think about in advance of any legislative proposals from the new government.
Okay, Ben, thank you very much indeed. Obviously, we'll bring you more news as and when we get some legislative policy announcement from the government and what that looks like when the necessary legislation is introduced into Parliament, and we'll brief you on that as and when it comes up. But for now, I hope that's given you a taster of what is possibly coming down the track. So thank you very much, Ben, being very useful as always, and thank you very much for watching.